What's up, guys? This is Liam here. This is not really going to be a channel introduction, that'll come later, but I just wanted to touch on a topic that I've seen come up recently on a couple of channels that I follow myself in the fitness community, and it's definitely something that always gets rehashed and rediscussed in different ways, but there's certainly been some novel concepts introduced to it, at least in mass, a little more lately, and that's strength-specific training in sport. And where that can diverge from hypertrophy training and general conditioning training, what the different modalities you can use to approach these goals either together or as independent outcomes would be. And I think CrossFit and Strongman actually play a big role in the change in these modalities recently that we see used by even just general athletes. They've blown up in popularity, and recently, at least with Strongman 2, we've seen a shift where it requires a greater degree of athleticism. We've increased the talent pool quite a bit. And because of the nature of the events in these kinds of competitions, it is no longer just who is the strongest for one rep max strength, and we'll be able to bleed that over into a little bit of an endurance-esque event. Now it requires both. And there's obviously some debate to be had about whether or not the title World's Strongest Man is applicable. I still feel it is, but there's definitely plenty of people in strongman that don't like the route we're headed down. I am a big fan of it. I like athleticism being a major component of this sport, and I do think it should remain central to it. Obviously, I'm not trying to make strongman CrossFit, but I've liked the direction it's heading, and I do feel that it's contributed positively to the strength training community. So I'd like to touch on what I feel that has been. The reason I'm mainly talking about it is Alexander Bromley, a YouTube channel that I'd highly encourage you guys to follow, a strongman competitor and aficionado of the sport, and a very knowledgeable person on strength training as well, released a video touching on strength training versus hypertrophy training and his views on the differences of it, as well as just in general what the differences are. I would encourage you to watch that video just because of the content in it is very informative. He does present it very well, and I would agree on just about everything from a conceptual level. I think the one point we're going to disagree on is mainly due to our own personal circumstances. Alex is obviously somebody who, as self-admittedly, hasn't struggled at being able to put on weight. He struggles more with trying to keep it off. I have come from the opposite end of the spectrum. I started engaging in this sport at 160 pounds at 6'6". The heaviest I have been was around 305. Right now, I tend to hover between 250 and 265 and fluctuate quite a bit in that range, unless I'm actively pushing to sit higher. I do intend one day to be competing in the super heavyweight division in strongman. Recently, I've only done heavyweight. I did an open competition just quite recently, Great Lakes Strongest Man, and placed fourth in the heavyweight division in open. That was my first higher level open kind of competition, and I wanted to just do heavyweight as my intro level to it to an extent. I've been competing for a while, but only local competitions. But I would like to move up to super heavyweights. That's where the money is in this sport still. That's where the fans are, and that is what I would like to eventually be in. And that might mean competing at a very low body weight, at least comparative to my peers in that. Likely the upper end of what I'll ever tend to be at is probably the low 300s. I intend to push for more than that, but I have to be realistic with myself as well, considering this has been a decade of me pursuing this. I have to recognize my own strengths and limitations. And so quite a long time ago, I did realize this. Weight has been an issue for me. Food has been an issue. There were times where I was eating to the point of throwing up every meal and still struggling to not lose weight. And I know some of you guys are going to be like, fix your diet. I mean, obviously, yeah, there's plenty of things now even that I should improve about it. But that was a time where I was very focused on it too. It wasn't like it was just a complete shit show and that was the reason I was struggling to eat. My satiety does not match my caloric expenditure. It's definitely less common, but there are others who fall into this category, and maybe this is the video for you if you're looking to try and understand where you fall into strength training a little more. Later, I'll demonstrate some of this stuff when I'm going to train, but for the moment, I just want to talk about the specific niche that has now been growing in strongman, and you're seeing a lot more of the top competitors, even in super heavyweight, fall into um, these lighter guys amongst the giants that can excel, maybe not quite as much in the 1 rep max capacity, but in things like the 10 to 15 rep range or medley events where there's a lot of movement, or things that require a great degree of skill acquisition, they make up for it and can beat their counterparts. And that's become a pretty critical part of this sport. And that's a pretty critical part of all non-basic strength sports like this. So anything where there is skills to it, football, rugby, you name it, there's going to be a greater relationship between what I see as this method of strength training and the general training of that sport than there is between what Alex was talking about, at least as the most bang for your buck type of training. So now, again, this is not something that is going to be mass applicable. If you are somebody that has no trouble putting on weight and your goal is to compete in an open weight division of a sport, and you are able to pursue that without it hindering your aerobic capacity and without it inhibiting your movement too much, that's probably the reasonable route to go. Alex is definitely right on that. But for somebody that would fall into my camp where weight is probably the hardest part of this sport, putting it on, eating food, namely, is just your nightmare. Well, you might want to focus more on neurological adaptation, which is what he was saying is a secondary focus that should be had with strength training. I would say needs to be your primary focus. You're going to have to shift your goals to be more around peak straining and long periods or planned periods of recovery of your nervous system. So this is going to be things like using supramaximal loads with partial reps. This would be a way to load both the nervous system and your skeletal muscular system with loads beyond what's actually achievable in the normal range of motion in this lift, the full range of motion. Something like, for instance, a rack pull over a deadlift. These can be ways where if you're doing them explosively, it can be a great way to reach these kinds of maximal stimulus that don't produce the same degree of muscular fatigue. So you will be able to still stimulate the same degree of nervous stimulation. You are not going to have to recover as much from a metabolic and muscular recovery standpoint, which means less food requirement and less growth needed. Now, there's obviously limitations with this, which is why Alex was suggesting to go the other route. Neurological adaptations, there's a limit to what you can achieve with it. There's a sharp plateau for how rapidly they are going to improve strength progress, but there is a continuous amount of progress to be made. There is absolutely a plateau, and as you reach the upper levels of your sport, it is going to be harder and harder to find the things to change that will allow you to make improvements. But there are always going to be things that can be adjusted to improve recovery, to allow for better stimulus, and to push other vectors of recovery that aren't food. Obviously, there's multiple sides to that, but pharmacology can come into play, supplements can come into play. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide your route to go with that, but there is absolutely room for discussion with that down the road here as well. I wanted to demonstrate some of these training principles later when I go and train. I figured this would be a good opportunity to discuss at least an intro to some of these things that I plan my training around. It's not going to be a very in-depth, comprehensive video. I'm going to just start introducing some of these concepts as I go. But I just wanted to get recording and kind of introduce this notion to you that if you are somebody that putting on weight is something you would consider the hardest aspect of your sport, then consider following a training modality that focuses more on neurological adaptation for strength than for muscle accrual for strength. It is not going to be universally applicable. I do think Alex is right that most people are going to find greater benefit as long as there isn't a weight cap for their sport that they're kind of at ends with in going this like 5x5 as the bulk of your training kind of route. I mean, that wasn't what he was suggesting, but if you watch his video, you'll get what I'm getting at with this. And I would encourage you to watch his video and subscribe to his channel, very informative guy. I've been following him for, I think it's probably been about 2 years, but definitely encourage giving him a subscribe. I'll catch you guys when I'm doing my training, but just wanted to give you guys that for now. Thanks. Bye.